Some stories don't need 1,000 words. Sometimes all it takes is a glance or a gentle lick from a loyal dog to stir something deep in the heart. Today, we invite you to step into the quiet world of a man who lived alone in the woods and a broken dog who had been left behind. Two souls both wounded in different ways, brought together by something stronger than fate, love, loyalty, and the will to fight back when no one else would. This isn't just a story about survival. It's a story about hope, about memory, and about a kind of love that doesn't speak because it doesn't need to. If you believe in kindness, if you believe that the bond between a man and a dog can change the course of a life, then this story is for you. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that touches the soul. Thank you for being here and for believing in the good. The wind drifted gently through the cornfields, carrying the quiet hum of insects and the soft gold of a fading Arkansas sun. Everything felt calm, almost too calm, until the silence was torn apart by the sound of a struggle. Inside a small wooden house, a man lay slumped against a cabinet, blood trickling from his temple, his breath broken and shallow. His name was Ben Holloway, 58, widowed and fiercely devoted to the patch of land his parents once called home. It wasn't a grand estate, just a few dozen acres, an old tractor, and the kind of memories that clung to the floorboards like dust. But to Ben, this land was sacred, and that's why they came. 3 men in black suits had arrived 2 hours earlier, claiming to represent a development firm. They wanted his land for mining, for building, for something that sounded more like destruction than progress. Ben said no, at first politely, then firmly. But these men hadn't come to negotiate. The blows came fast, a punch to the ribs, one to the jaw. They tied his hands to a chair and threw a manila envelope on the table, their final offer. Ben spat blood on the floor and whispered, "This land is not for sale." The tallest of the three, a slick man named Kincaid, frowned. "You old folks never learn, do you?" He reached into his coat. The glint of steel flashed in the fading light. Ben's heart clenched. Maybe this was the end. No peace, no dignity. Just a bullet in the home he once built with the woman he loved. But then, a bark. Not a regular bark. This one was loud, sharp, fierce, the kind that freezes time and cuts through bone. It came from the hallway. Scout, the dog Ben had rescued months earlier when it was nothing but skin and fear, lying wounded by the creek. Back then, Scout didn't trust anyone, but Ben took him in, healed his wounds, fed him, and spoke to him like a friend. He gave him a name. Now Scout wasn't scared anymore. He charged in like a storm of fur and fire teeth, bared eyes blazing. He sank his jaws into the man's arm, the one holding the gun. The weapon dropped to the floor with a clatter. The others panicked. One grabbed a chair, the other lunged with a stick. Scout spun, barking like thunder, slashing the air with fury. In the chaos, Ben, still bleeding and bound, crawled to the old rotary phone. His hands trembled as he dialed. "They're here," he gasped. "They have guns. But my dog is fighting." The dispatcher's voice was calm. "Help is on the way." Minutes later, sirens split the silence. The attackers tried to flee, but Scout blocked the door, growling low and ready. When police burst into the house, they paused, stunned by what they saw. A bruised older man, a blood-stained dog, and a bond between them no bullet could break. Ben collapsed. Scout rushed to his side, licking his face, whining with worry. "He saved me," Ben whispered. "Without him, I wouldn't still be here." The sun sank low on the porch that evening. Ben and Scout sat like they always did, side by side, but that night, Ben's hand rested on Scout's back, a little longer, a little tighter. Because loyalty can't be bought. And love, the kind that barks before the bullet, can only be earned with your whole heart. The land wasn't big, but it stretched quietly beneath old oak trees beside a creek that trickled year-round through the Arkansas woods. Every morning, sunlight slipped through the leaves and spilled onto the wooden porch where Ben Holloway would sit in silence, sipping coffee and gazing at his green vegetable garden and the cornfields beyond. There was no cell signal, no internet, and Ben didn't miss either. To him, this simple life was a kind of resurrection. But even nature couldn't fill the quiet ache of loneliness. Lucille, his wife of over 30 years, had passed from cancer 3 years ago. Since that day, the house had felt far too large. Dinners were quiet, evenings were quieter. And every night as Ben sat under the moonlight, he still found himself turning to his right, the spot where she used to sit, then let out a slow, wordless sigh. One early autumn morning, while trimming weeds along a dirt road near the back of the property, Ben heard a sound, faint, almost imperceptible. A soft whimper came from a nearby bush. He bent down to check, and there it was, a tiny creature curled up, soaked to the bone, shivering, a puppy. Its fur was matted with mud, and its hind leg was swollen and red. Its eyes didn't hold aggression, just raw fear. The kind of fear that only comes from being abandoned too many times. Ben crouched low, slowly reaching out a hand. "It's okay, little guy," he whispered. "I won't hurt you." He named the pup Scout because it had wandered its way through the woods and somehow found him. In time, Scout became his first real companion since Lucille. At first, Scout was afraid of everything. Thunder, headlights, and even the sound of the wind rattling the windows made him cower in the corner. But over time, with patience and Ben's deep, steady voice, Scout began to soften. Ben built him a small bed beside the fireplace. He cooked rice and chicken every night, cleaned Scout's wounds with gentle hands, and rubbed his back when storms rolled in. Sometimes during quiet evenings, Ben would talk to Scout, telling stories about Lucille, as if the dog might somehow understand the shape of the emptiness inside him. And maybe Scout did understand, because whenever Ben paused mid-sentence and stared into the distance, lost in memory, Scout would quietly walk over and rest his head on Ben's leg, exhaling slowly as if sharing a sadness too deep for words. Every morning they worked the land together. Ben watered the crops. Scout trailed behind him, never too far, always watching. When Ben went to the creek, Scout would lie patiently on the bank, keeping eyes on every step. At first, Ben thought it was just loyalty, but over time he realized it was love, the quiet kind, the kind that runs deep like roots beneath the soil. Scout became part of the rhythm of Ben's days, barking at snakes near the chicken coop, racing ahead during fence checks, or simply lying at Ben's feet while the sun dipped behind the trees. That land, once a place haunted by loss, had become a home again. Not because it changed, but because Ben no longer lived there alone. One afternoon at the local market, a middle-aged man asked Ben, "You live out there by yourself. Don't you get scared?" Ben chuckled and patted his Scout's head as the dog curled at his feet. "I'm not alone," he said. "I live with someone who listens." On clear nights, Ben would light a lantern and set 2 cups of tea on the porch table. One for him, one for Lucille, and Scout would sit beside him, boy present, not needing to speak. Just there, and for Ben, that was enough. Once, while running his fingers through Scout's now silky fur, Ben whispered, "Thank you for showing up. Just when I thought I'd lost everything." Scout looked up at him with deep, dark eyes, the kind that didn't need to say, "I understand." To the world, Ben Holloway may have just been an older man in the woods with a dog, but to the trees, the stream, and to Scout, he was the heartbeat of that land. And that heartbeat, though once cracked, was now steady again, because of a small, fragile creature with 4 legs. And an unshakable love. Scout came to Ben on a damp morning when dew still clung to wild leaves at the forest's edge. He was just a pup, thin to the bone, eyes wide with terror, and a swollen red injury on his back leg. Ben found him curled up near a rock by the creek, shaking as if one more gust of wind might carry him away. And from that moment on, neither of them would ever be alone again. "What happened? You kid?" Ben murmured, crouching low, his calloused hand reaching out with quiet care. Scout didn't bark, didn't growl. He just stared at Ben, eyes wide like 2 drops of sorrow. Not the stare of a wild animal, but of someone who had been left behind too many times. Ben gently placed him onto an old jacket, scooped him into his arms, and carried him home. He laid the pup on a blanket by the fireplace and tore a piece of his shirt to dress the wound. It wasn't deep, but it was swollen and inflamed. Ben had no fancy meds, only what nature and memory had taught him. He boiled wild ginseng, mint leaves, and dried roots, the same herbal remedy his father once used to treat livestock injuries. He cleaned the swelling with warm water, then applied the balm with bare fingers. Scout flinched at first, but didn't resist. He lay still, whimpered quietly, then sighed as the pain began to ease. "You're okay now." "I won't let you die out here," Ben whispered, his voice rough, like wind through pine. The days that followed were filled with patience, healing not just Scout's body, but Ben's soul. At first, Scout refused food. Ben cooked rice and chicken, placed it right by his nose, and waited sitting nearby quietly until the little pup finally began to lick it. Drop by drop at night, Scout would jolt awake in his sleep, whimpering from whatever he remembered. Ben would reach out and rest a hand on his back, stroking him gently, matching each breath. "It's all right, I'm here now." After a week, Scout was able to stand, limping at first, but his ears perked up. When he heard sound, bit by bit, he followed Ben outside, sat on the porch while Ben watered the garden, lay under the tree while Ben read. Scout became part of the rhythm of the farm, and in that quiet, sacred space, he wasn't just an animal. He was a presence. Each night after the dishes were washed and the oil lamp lit, Ben would sit in his old rocking chair on the porch. Scout curled up at his feet, resting his head on the worn rug, and Ben would start talking. Not fairy tales, not ghost stories, but memories. Stories of Lucille, the woman who had shared nearly a lifetime with him. Lucille loved autumn, Ben would say, voice warm under the porch light. She'd bake apple pies on cool afternoons. Whole house would smell like cinnamon. And she always wore that silly apron with the tiny pumpkin on it. Scout didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone, the way memories were being spoken aloud, breathed into the night so they wouldn't fade. And so he lay there quietly listening like he was helping hold those memories in place. You know, Ben added once, if Lucille were still around, I think she would have liked you. Scout wagged his tail, softly, didn't bark, just inched a little closer. As the weeks passed, his fur grew shinier. He ate well, slept soundly, and began to follow Ben everywhere. To the creek where Ben fetched water, Scout walked right beside him. To the fields where Ben pulled weeds, Scout kept watch, eyes sharp for rabbits. He didn't need to be called, he just knew where to be. The most amazing thing about Scout, Ben would later say, wasn't how smart he was. It was how intuitive he became. Scout seemed to feel everything Ben couldn't say. On days when Ben sat quiet, staring at the woods like they held ghosts, Scout would gently rest his head on Ben's leg. No questions, no tail wagging, just presence. When nightmares woke Ben in the dead of night, sweating and breathless, Scout would be there sitting silently at the bedroom door, watching over him until he fell asleep again. One evening, after a heavy rain, Ben sat under the porch roof, watching the trees drip like they were crying too. The breeze rustled the leaves like a familiar song. He whispered more to himself than anyone. You being here, Xiao, makes me realize I was never really alone. Scout lifted his head briefly, then settled back down, his tail thumping lightly in rhythm with Ben's breath. They say dogs are man's best friend, but Scout was more than that. He was a living piece of the past, a quiet warmth in the cold of grief, a reminder that even broken love can be patched back together with a lick to the hand, a place beside you at night, and a gaze that never lets you go. In that little cabin deep in the woods with no cell signal and no city noise, there was a man and a dog, two lonely souls who had found each other in the cracks of life, and together they were learning how to live again. That afternoon began like any other. Ben was repairing the southern fence post, hammer in hand, mumbling about the evening chill. Scout lay nearby beneath the shade of a tree, eyes half closed, soaking in the late day sun. Neither of them knew. A different kind of storm was already heading their way. Not from the sky, but from the dusty road leading to the edge of the farm. Three sleek black SUVs pulled up in front of Ben's weathered wooden gate. Doors open, and out stepped several men in tailored suits, crisp ties and polished leather shoes, an image completely out of place in the quiet countryside. Leading them was a tall man with slicked back hair and dark sunglasses. Miles Kincaid, CEO of an energy conglomerate quietly acquiring rural land rumored to hold rich underground resources. Ben stood by the fence, gripping a hammer. Scout at his side, ears perked. Mr. Holloway, Kincaid said with a thin smile, one that cut through the still air. I'm Miles Kincaid. We're developing a major ecological conservation project in this region. Your property is crucial to that vision. Ben squinted. Ecological conservation. Since when do energy companies plant trees? Kincaid chuckled. We're rebranding, going greener, more sustainable. You could be part of that transformation. Thanks, Ben replied flatly, but I'm not selling. We could make you a very generous offer, Kincaid said, opening a sleek briefcase and sliding out a folder. We'd even help relocate you somewhere closer to town. Cell reception, internet hospital nearby. Ben shook his head. I don't need convenience, I need peace. We can come back. If you want more time to think, Kincaid said, his tone tightening. We're not here to force anything. Ben said nothing, just nodded once. Scout let out a single sharp bark as if showing them the way out. 2 weeks later, they came back. Then again, but this time no briefcase, no proposals. Just quiet footsteps around the land, cameras clicking, measuring wheels rolling. Men stared too long at the ridge where the creek flowed. Ben watched from a distance, silent, jaw tight. He'd spent a lifetime around people who understood the land, who knew it, needed water, sunlight, patience, but these men didn't see the soil. They saw figures on a map, mineral rights extraction potential. To them, this wasn't home. It was an asset. And then came that one late October afternoon, the day everything changed. Ben was in the kitchen boiling water for tea, got late curled up near the fireplace. Outside, gray clouds gathered heavy with rain. A sound broke the silence, the sharp scrape of metal against the wood at the back door. Scout leapt up, growling. Ben turned to the window and caught a shadow moving outside. Before he could react, the door burst open. 3 men stepped in. Their suits were still on, but the politeness was gone. Kincaid stood in the center. No more sunglasses, just eyes cold as iron. "We waited for you to come around." "Mr. Holloway," he said, "but you made your choice." Ben backed up, hand tightening on the kettle's handle. "Get out of my house," he said, voice trembling, but clear. "Not until you sign," one of the others had said, waving an envelope and stepping forward. "This is my house," Ben shouted. The third man shoved him to the floor. Scout lunged but was kicked hard and sent tumbling across the room, letting out a pained whimper. Kincaid pulled a small pistol from his coat. "We're not here to hurt anyone, unless we have to." They dragged Ben upright and tied his hands to a chair. Scout staggered to his feet, blood at his lips, eyes locked on Ben. At that moment, Ben didn't feel the pain. He felt fire, anger. Not for himself, but for everything they were trying to take. The land, the memories, the quiet he'd fought to reclaim after Lucille. "You think this is just dirt," he growled through gritted teeth. "This is blood, sweat, my wife, my father. You'll never understand that." Kincaid leaned in close, sneering. "We don't have to understand it. We just have to make you disappear." Scout growled low in the corner, a trickle of red staining his jaw. But his eyes, those eyes burned. Ben met his gaze and gave the faintest nod. The silence that followed was tight, breathless. Then Scout barked. Ben's kitchen, once warm and filled with quiet comfort, had turned into chaos. The wooden table was overturned, the teapot shattered on the floor, and chairs scattered like fallen soldiers. Ben sat bound, blood trickling from his temple, hands shaking not from fear but fury. Kincaid stood in front of him, pistol in hand, raising it slowly. No more talk of conservation, no more charm, only cold certainty in his eyes. The kind of man who used force to finish what words could not. The muzzle pointed directly at Ben's head, and Scout was watching, waiting. What happened next would echo far beyond those woods. Ben didn't beg. He simply lifted his chin, exhaled through clenched teeth, and stared straight ahead, unflinching. Inside him, it wasn't just fear. It was regret. Regret for the things he hadn't done. Regret that he couldn't protect the place he called home. And above all, I regret that Scout might never understand why he disappeared. Outside, storm clouds gathered. The wind shifted. Leaves fluttered through the open doorway. Then, cutting through the chaos like a bell in the fog, a sound rang out. A bark. Not loud, but deep, sharp, certain. The bark echoed from the hallway. All 3 men turned their heads instinctively, and in that split second, like a drawn bow snapping free, Scout charged in. He was no longer the frightened pup Ben once found curled by the creek. Now he was a fighter, fire in his eyes, instinct in his heart. He didn't hesitate. Scout lunged at the man with the gun, letting out a snarl that rattled the walls. His jaws clamped down hard on the attacker's wrist, and the pistol hit the tile with a sharp clack. The man screamed, blood spraying from the torn sleeve. The second man tried to kick, but Scout was faster. He spun and swiped with a paw, leaving 3 deep gashes across the man's face. Blood splattered the white wall behind him. The third one backed up, trembling, reaching into his coat. Scout squared up, growled, and froze him in place. No bite needed, just a look. It was enough. In the middle of the chaos, Ben, still tied, bleeding, began dragging himself across the kitchen floor inch by inch toward the old rotary phone on the shelf. Every movement sent a jolt of pain through his ribs, but he didn't stop. Sweat and blood mixed as he reached the baseboard, leaned up and hit the speaker button with his chin. His fingers fumbled for the keypad. 911. A calm female voice answered. 911. Emergency. What is your emergency? Ben gasped. Holloway Farm. Under attack. They've got weapons. My dog. He's holding them off. The dispatcher didn't hesitate. Stay on the line. Patrol is en route. Stay where you are. And while the call continued, Scout kept fighting, not to kill, but to defend, to push them back, to keep them away from the one soul he called family. Kincaid, his sleeve soaked in blood, crawled toward the fallen pistol. His fingers were inches away. But Scout struck again, diving straight into his shoulder. This time he didn't let go. Kincaid screamed and collapsed, pinned to the ground. The second man bolted for the door, but tripped on the threshold, slamming his face into the frame. Blood poured from his nose. "What the hell is that, dog?" Ben slumped against the wall, watched it all unfold. And in that moment, he didn't see a dog. He saw a friend, a comrade, a soul more loyal than any human he had ever known. Sirens wailed in the distance. Red and blue lights flickered through the kitchen window. The three intruders were no longer men. They were panicked animals. One crawled under the table. One lay face down, breath shallow. And Kincaid, bloodied and broken, tried one last crawl to the back door, only to find Scout standing square in his path. This time Scout didn't bark. He didn't move. He just stood there, still unwavering, the living statue of loyalty. When the officers burst into the room, they didn't need to ask what happened. The scene said it all. A shattered kitchen, a bruised, bleeding man against the wall, and a dog battered but alert standing guard. One officer stepped forward and knelt beside Ben. "Mr. Holloway." Ben gave the faintest nod. "The dog. He saved me outside as the ambulance pulled up. Paramedics checked Scout. Just surface wounds, a few cuts, some bruising." Scout sat beside Ben on the bench of the ambulance, tail thumping lightly. Chest heaving, Ben rested his hand on Scout's head, his voice cracked with emotion. "You didn't just save my life. You saved my faith in this world." Scout lifted his head and gently touched his nose to Ben's hand. No words are needed, no big gestures, just a quiet kind of friendship proven in blood pain, and the kind of courage only love can summon. As the sun dipped behind the hills, its final rays spilled through the trees, casting a golden glow on two silhouettes. A man and his dog sitting side by side in silence. But they weren't alone anymore. When the officers burst into the small cabin on the edge of the forest, they froze for a moment. An older man, bruised and bloodied, slumped against a wooden wall. His hands trembled from pain and cold. Blood trickled down his forehead, soaking his shirt. And beside him was a dog, scruffy eyes alert, his body scratched and battered, but standing tall like a statue guarding his person. "Mr. Ben Holloway." One officer asked softly. Ben looked up and gave a faint nod. "I'm okay. But him?" He turned to Scout. The dog was panting hard, a deep gash on his left shoulder from the fight, but his ears still stood tall. When Ben reached out and gently touched his head, Scout whimpered and then licked his hand. That touch, warm, soft, trusting, broke Ben. He didn't cry from the pain, not from the fear, but because he realized he was still alive because of the very creature he once found abandoned. A soul that had been thrown away now saved him with all the love and loyalty it had. Ben held Scout close in a pool of blood, tears in the flashing lights of police cruisers outside. "You didn't just save me," he whispered hoarsely. "You reminded me why I'm still here." Scout was rushed to a vet clinic in the nearest town. Thankfully, nothing serious. Some puncture wounds, a few deep scratches, and a bruised rib. The vet looked at Ben and said, "He's a fighter. He wants to live. He wants to go home with you." Ben smiled, eyes still wet. "He's not just coming home," he said quietly. "He is home." Just days after the incident, local media picked up the story. A farmer attacked in his home, saved by his brave dog. It started as a small piece on the back page, but then the details came out. A widower living quietly in the woods, a rescue dog who turned protector, a battle not for money but for memory and roots. Within a week, the story of Ben and Scout was everywhere. The Arkansas Star, Heartland Today, and even USA Today. Ben was called the man who refused to sell his roots, and Scout, now photographed and seen on national TV, was honored as the dog that barked back. Journalists, photographers, and filmmakers began arriving at the little farm. But they weren't just chasing headlines. They came to feel something long missing from modern life, the unspoken bond between a man and his land, between a man and his dog, between memory and the future. When asked why he refused to sell the land, Ben simply pointed to the fields behind his house. "If you ever stood out there at dawn," he said, "heard the creek running beneath the roots, and saw Scout waiting for me by the fence, you'd understand." He paused and smiled gently. "Money can buy a lot, but it can't buy peace. And it sure as hell can't buy loyalty." The town held a small ceremony to honor Ben and Scout. On a makeshift wooden stage in front of City Hall under the cool breeze of a November afternoon, the mayor handed Ben a plaque for bravery and resilience in protecting one's land. Scout received a small medal engraved with "loyal to the end." Scout didn't understand the speeches, he didn't understand the clapping or the camera flashes. But when Ben knelt, placed the medal around his neck and whispered, Good Boy Scout wagged his tail just like he had the day he was rescued from the wild. After the ceremony, neighbors from near and far stopped by the farm. They brought pies, flowers, and even sketches to fix the damaged fence. One shy 10-year-old boy approached Scout and held up a crayon, drawing a man and a dog standing in a field, the sun rising behind them. "I drew this for you and Scout," he said. Ben took the picture with a shaky hand, looked down at the boy, then at Scout and smiled. A smile full of gratitude, full of healing. A smile that said they had found each other for a reason. Ben looked at the drawing, then at the boy. His eyes welled with tears. "Thank you, son," he said softly. "This dog didn't just save me. He did more than that. He reminded me that sometimes a creature without words can teach us things we spend a lifetime trying to understand." As time passed, Ben returned to his quiet routine, watering the garden, fixing the chicken coop, reading books on the porch. Scout was always there. Every morning, every evening, every night. News of the incident slowly faded. Kincaid and his men were charged with assault, illegal possession of firearms, and trespassing. His company's name crumbled. But Ben, once just a name on a piece of land, had become something else, a living symbol of resilience, of choosing principle over profit. One winter night, as snow fell gently in the yard, Ben sat beside the fireplace. Scout lay curled at his feet. Ben rested his hand on Scout's head, stroking slowly. "Maybe I survived," he murmured. "Not just because you saved me, but because I needed to learn how to love life again." Scout looked up at him, and in those deep, gentle eyes there was something quiet, something knowing, as if he understood every word, every scar, every slow step toward healing. That night, for the first time in years, Ben Holloway slept deeply. In his dream, Lucille stood beneath the rose tree she once planted, smiling, and beside her was Scout, with eyes warm like fire in falling snow. A few weeks later, when life had settled, Ben picked up an old paintbrush. With a trembling hand, he wrote a single line on the wooden gate of the farm: "This land is watched by love, and love bites." Simple words, but they carried everything he believed in. That love isn't just soft, it protects, it fights. It holds the line when no one else will. That afternoon, the sun dipped low, painting the trees in amber light. Ben and Scout sat on the porch, just like always. Scout rested his head on Ben's knee, breathing slow and steady. The scars on his body were fading, but his loyalty, it was shining brighter than ever. Ben reached down and gently rubbed Scout's alert ears. His voice softened, meant only for the dog beside him. "You're home now, Scout, and you always will be." It wasn't just a statement. It was a promise to the land, to the memories, and to the small soul who had once been rescued, and who in return had rescued the man who saved him. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. If it touched your heart, please hit subscribe and share this video to spread a little more light from the world of those both people and dogs who never give up on each other.